Welcome to another edition of Voice of the Diaspora. The combined Guyanese diaspora organizations present the Washington Conference on Guyana, set for the 27th to the 28th of September 2023. In studio with me today is Caribbean Guyana Institute for Democracy President RICKFORD BURKE, who is also one of Guyana's leading political activists and rights advocate based in the US. Burke has been creating waves in the diaspora, holding the PPP accountable. But this evening we will be talking about that conference, and we will also touch on why the PPP, and primarily the Vice President Bar Jagdeo, is so up in arms against that conference. RICKFORD BURKE joins me now. RICKFORD BURKE, welcome to Voice of the Diaspora. It's good to see you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well,
Good night to your listeners. Good evening. Good night to your listeners.
I know that you have been very busy lately. You usually are, but I think it was the Labor Day weekend last weekend. You were hobnobbing actually with a lot of prominent Americans, a lot of congressmen and congresswomen. You met also with the Reverend Al Sharpton, one of the world's leading civil rights activists from America. When you mention the name Al Sharpton, you're mentioning someone who was there when Dr. Martin Luther King, was fighting the struggle. Malcolm X was fighting the struggle. And Al Sharpton, along with Farrakhan, are perhaps the two leading civil rights leader in the United States at the moment. You had the opportunity to meet with him. I want my viewers to see this photo. That's yourself and Al Sharpton there. And you did say that you spoke to Al Sharpton about Guyana. What did you talk about?
Well, I've been having this conversation about Guyana with him for a number of years, and I've always said to him I would want him to go to Guyana and also to talk with Guyanese about the struggle for civil rights and how do we attain that same level of consciousness, that same level of activism to achieve the things we want, which is equality and equity in Guyana. And so when I saw him, I told him that we have the conference coming up and I'd like for him to play a role. So we'll see if he's available. And if he's available, then we'll have him play a role.
We'll have him play a role. And I have to reiterate your work and your connection to so many powerful people in the U.S. to highlight the Guyana situation. Kudos on that. Look, we are going to talk about the Washington Conference, and you have the opportunity to expand on what it's all about, the theme of the conference, and what you expect, you and your organizations, CGID and the other organizations involved, what you expect from that conference, and who will be there at that conference. The Washington Conference, scheduled for September the 28th to the 29th, to the 27th to the 28th. The 29th is my board, and hopefully I will be in the US if there is a very rich Guyanese or some rich Guyanese who are not connected to the PPP can
Right?
sponsor my trip, and I would like, But RICKFORD, once again, you have been doing a great job. You are the leading activist,
Thank you.
not one of, but you are the leading activist today in the diaspora. That has to do with Guyana and the struggle for our liberation, the struggle for equity and equality, and the right for us to benefit from the redistribution of the wealth of that country. Talk to us about the Washington Conference.
Well, the concept for the Washington conference came out of my organization's concern that um, we have been communicating with U.S. government officials um, since the government returned to power about the abuses, the excesses, the um, civil rights, constitutional rights violations, and the abuse of the police force to stifle dissent from African Guyanese and opposition political activists. And so we started to plan this conference um, since after the last meeting where the Attorney General of New York spoke in Brooklyn. And we also plan to have a meeting in Queens of that nature, but we decided to press the accelerator on this conference when Anthony Blinken, Secretary of State of the United States, went to Guyana and only talk about what is going on with the government. The United States has a policy with regard to Guyana of talking only with the government and giving the opposition scant regard. That's how I'd put it.
Mhm.
And it's a continuation from the racist foreign policy of the Trump administration. The PUP government doesn't speak for the country, the entire country. The country and the electorate is evenly divided. The PUP government is a one-seat majority government. And so just like that happens in the Middle East, the United States government has an obligation to speak to all the different sides of the political spectrum. And that has not been happening adequately, we feel. So once the Secretary of State went to Guyana and only spoke with the government mainly, we said we have to we have to now begin planning the Washington conference, which we had already had the framework for. And so that's why we decided to have the conference. We planned it very quietly. Once all the arrangements were in place, in the main, we announced it, and the government went crazy, which justified the need for the conference and for us to have a discussion with our elected officials to let them know what is happening in Guyana and ask them for ideas and concepts for us to all work together, including the United States government, to achieve the ideals set out in the theme of the conference, which are inclusive governance, inclusive economic growth, social equity, equal rights and justice, and sustainable economic development for all Guyanese. The government came
In
out
the era
against
of
that
oil and gas.
in the era of oil and gas. The Barjag there when the government said they're against it. So the government is against equality for black people and opposition supporters. They're against equitable governance or inclusive governance. They're against inclusive growth, which means everybody must be included as the economy and the country grows. And equal rights and justice. They don't believe black people have the same rights maybe as East Indian supporters of the PPP, or opposition supporters have the same rights as the government supporters. And then they're against sustainable development for all. And it's something that Guyanese must contemplate. This is profound, that a government which should embrace a conference that is promoting inclusive growth, inclusiveness, equality, equity, they're against it. It shows that they're acknowledging that they're racist. And so Jagdeer came out blazing, calling me a criminal. And like I told him, the only criminal that might be there would be somebody that might be in his family. And he's disrespectful to be referring to black people as criminals.
But
Everybody's a criminal.
we will go to what Jack
What he
Deal
said.
said, and
Right.
we will show
So,
that clip, and you will be allowed to respond to that. But
okay,
remain on the
on the conference.
conference and who will be there, what, and that sort of stuff.
So the conference has two parts. We're not announcing publicly the closed door sessions, but the open sessions, which means that uh, persons in the press who register
Mm.
might be allowed to observe those, and we might stream it are the speeches. We have people coming from Guyana that would participate. We have attorneys from Guyana. We have some politicians from Guyana. We have some from people from civil society. And then we have some government officials that would brief us, and we would brief them on the situation on the ground, and we'll talk about U.S. policy. We'll have a briefing from the White House. We've asked them for a briefing. We've asked the State Department for a briefing. And basically, what's a briefing is that they discuss current matters between the countries that can be discussed with us, and we exchange ideas in terms of policy conceptualization, relationships, how the U.S. should probably approach the Amerindian community, the African, Afro-Guyanese community. So we discuss those kinds of things and we exchange ideas. That's what the Constitution requires of the United States government and citizens to be engaged. And so that's what we will do. We will be talking with our legislators. We'll be talking with senators. We'll be talking with members of Congress. Congressman Jeffries is going to play a major role, give a speech. Another senior member of the United States government, the executive branch, will participate and listen to our views, and we'll listen to theirs, and we'll have an exchange. That's why we wanted to have the conference in Washington. We will also have discussions with the FBI and the U.S. Justice Department to talk about transnational oppression crimes by the government and by government officials, by crimes like threatening us, threatening to blackmail us, harassing us in the diaspora, acting like they're Putin, acting like they're some despotic government that goes after their dissidents or nationals that criticize them, like China, Iran, North Korea. So we want to have that discussion. We also want to have that discussion with the Justice Department. And also, one of the things that we'll be highlighting on the agenda is the fact that we've had these extrajudicial killings, which the United States government condemned. And now the United States government is playing footsie with the same people who allegedly committed those killings. So we want to have a discussion on that. And we want to know what the United States position is on that. We will be talking about the government seizing lands belonging to Black people. I just noticed Attorney Nigel Hughes, within the last 2 days, writing the government about another situation where the government has taken away lands from a businessman, an African Guyanese businessman who has acquired land to build a hotel, a Hilton hotel, and they took away the land. The Granger administration leased that land to the gentleman and his business partners. The PP government came into power in 2020, took it away. Then they were pressured, they gave him another plot. Then they took it away now, and I understand they want to give it to one of Jack Dale's East Indian friends. That cannot happen. It is disrespectful to Black people. The country is 83,000 square miles. 18% of the country is occupied. 18. How dare these racists in the PPP think that they can dispossess Black people of lands? So we will talk about that. We will talk about that. And we will talk about all the other issues. We'll talk about what happened in Mecca. And we'll talk about the police force being used to attack you, me, others in the diaspora who are speaking out, to go after Black citizens in the country. All of that we'll talk about. And we will address our concerns with our government officials. And that's why we have the conference. We will have an
you
exchange.
you will have a lot of officials there, I presume. You said Hakeem Jeffries will make a presentation. Of course, Hakeem Jeffries is prominent in the U.S. government, and so on. Look, who are some of the other prominent congressmen and women you expect to be there, and what do you expect them to do after that conference in relation to holding Guyana accountable in whatever form or way?
Well, that'll be part of the discussion at the conference. We want accountability. The government has asked us some questions, which we've answered and returned to them, which we're not going to disclose publicly. But there has to be action. There has to be action. And coming out of this conference, we want to establish some sort of mechanism where our concerns are not ignored. Some sort of mechanism that involves the legislative branch of the government, the the executive branch, the Biden administration, and the diaspora. We believe Guyana is in crisis. We believe that the actions of the PP government at some point in time is going to lead to civil conflict, because nobody's going to be nobody's going to sit by again and allow themselves to be oppressed by a racist government that wants to put black people in subjugation. And they're using police violence. They're using other forms of violence and harassment of Afro-Guyanese citizens. And when you have that kind of oppression, it leads to conflict. And so we want to avoid that. That's why we want our elected officials here in the government to intervene now and say to the government, this has to stop. You cannot oppress Afro-Guyanese citizens. And like I said, coming out of that conference, we hope that we will form or establish some kind of mechanism for continued dialogue.
Have you reached
So
out to
we
the
have
vice?
invited several
Sorry, go
members
ahead.
of Congress. We are still in communication with them. When they confirm, when we make the final statement, we'll say who they are. But we've invited members of the Congressional Black Caucus. We have invited some key senators in the United States Senate. We've invited persons from civil society here, religious leaders, and from civil society and political leaders in Guyana.
Have you reached out to the U.S. Vice President at any juncture? Have you invited her to participate in that Washington conference? Is she aware, coming out of your organization, is she aware of what is happening in Guyana? Have you tried to reach out to her for an audience?
I'm sure she's aware of what's happening in Guyana. In terms of whether we've engaged her and any other members of the Biden administration, we prefer not to say at this point in time, which is an agreement we have with some of the people who are helping us to organize this conference. What I'll say is that we are talking to persons in the Biden administration and persons in Congress about this conference.
Wonderful. Rickford Burke here on Voice of the Diaspora. Of course, this is going to be a brief program. Um, Burke has the opportunity to expand on what the conference is all about and to make Guyanese at home and abroad aware of the conference, what it's all about, and what is expected coming out of that conference that can influence Guyanese to ensure that the oppression and suppression, are discontinued. Jack Dio, the vice president, who we know is the de facto president of Guyana, has had some harsh words to say about the conference and about you. He called you a criminal. He said that any U.S. Congress people who associate with the Washington conference would be, associating with a criminal, and he has leveled some serious allegations against you, which I will give the viewers the opportunity to hear directly from him in this clip and to get your response to what Mr. Jagdio said.
Rickford Burke is the same kind of trend. Now, his organization hosting an activity in Washington to talk about discrimination in Guyana. Now, the first thing they should do is to catch him and lock him up, because he is that organization that he has should be registered under FARA. He's lobbying in the US, and it's illegal to lobby the way he is doing it unless you're registered as a foreign agent. So that's what they should do, and maybe someone needs to complain to the Justice Department and other places. that he is doing that. He's collecting money for that purpose. And I think he's ripping people off. He creates this organization. He has to generate activities and to have profile, and then he raises money to do this. So that's what he's been doing. And then we know that he's a criminal. He tried to extort businessmen for money here. So anybody who associates with him, they're associating with a criminal type, a criminal in Washington. And we will make this point, you know, and I don't care which congressman or anybody else who wants to be part of a criminal network, because that is what he has. I don't care about that. Because at the end of the day, the people of this country matter, and particularly those who live here. They matter. So we will robustly take that on, and we'll point out all of this. In fact, he'll get some robust engagements there, and we'll embarrass those who will be part of these activities, because we point out there are links to a criminal who is living off of the U.S. and probably living illegally off of the proceeds in that country.
Vice President Barjagdio, they're calling you a criminal in Washington, saying that you're wanted in Guyana for extortion and a number of other things. He was very vehement in his delivery. And, you know, how do you respond to the Vice President of Guyana and those views that you would have extrapolated there in that clip?
Well, the first thing I'll say is that if any criminal that will be at the conference is probably somebody made by Barjagdio's parents. That's the first thing I'll say. The second thing I'll say, that's his view of all black leaders. We're all criminals. He is a product of the KKK movement. He is the grand wizard of the PPP KKK movement. He's disrespectful to black people. He thinks that every black person who criticizes him is a criminal. He's taking a page from the MAGA Republicans in this country, and he's contemptuous of black people. He also said in some other interview with Critic that I live in a basement. He sounds like an idiot. Nobody believes anything he says. I have never been arrested in my life. Barjagdio has been arrested. He says that CGID collect money. CGID does not collect money from anybody. But I don't want to give any credence to anything he has said. Everybody knows that not one, as a matter of fact, if you look at the journalists, they're all laughing at him, because everybody knows that he's being very defamatory and libelous. And we have a law firm that will address that issue here in this country. But I want people to understand that Barjagdio thinks that only him and the PUP must have a voice. Every black person that talks about the atrocities of his government is a criminal. Now let's examine Barjagdio's history and let's see who's a criminal. Barjagdio right now is a criminal defendant for murder before the Inter-American Human Rights Commission. He's being accused of murder. Barjagdio and his government formed death squads that killed over 1,400 young black men. He's being accused of being a killer. He's accused of forming those death squads that killed Ronald Waddle and so many others. We've been calling for him to be placed before the International War Crimes Tribunal. That's genocide. Second, Barjagdio was just caught on tape, videotape. The whole world saw it, negotiating allegedly a $500,000 bribe from what he thought was a Chinese company that wanted to do business in Guyana, which turned out to be federal agents and journalists. He was trying to extort $500,000
That's the
from them.
Sugate. That's the Sugate.
That's true. Right. He uses middlemen to collect bribes, allegedly. Now, who's the criminal? But what Barjagdio is talking about extortion is because he has a supporter of his party that has a car dealership that scams people. And some of the people complain to us, hundreds of them, And we made a post on Facebook calling on that company to pay back the people their money. And the government said that's extortion. And if that's extortion, then that's so be it. We want justice for those people who were scammed. And it shows the mentality of Barry Jagdeo. Barry Jagdeo prefer to side with someone who's ripping people off, who is scamming black people mostly, vulnerable people in society. Barry Jagdeo is associating with people right now who were jailed in America, who now return to Guyana and they build big security guard company, they build big hospitals or whatever it is. All of the people who Barry Jagdeo support and who support him here, over 100 of them are currently on the FBI investigation here for gold smuggling, sending money to terrorists, drug trafficking, and money laundering. Right now, the group that they formed to counter CGID, some NDC or something like that, is on the investigation allegedly for sending money to Barry Jagdeo. And that is being investigated by the federal government. And that money they raised here allegedly to pay some lobbyists, and they send the money to Guyana, allegedly to Jagdeo, and or Jagdeo's party. Also, he says, we are criminals because we're having this conference. That's their view of any black person who wants to talk about their racism. Remember when Coffee 250 organization was planning to have a conference on the emerging apartheid state? Barry Jagdeo, when the Attorney General, said that conference was unconstitutional. Why? Because black people are talking about the modern day servitude that the PPP wants to impose on them, which is apartheid and racism. So let's examine who really is a criminal. Barry Jagdeo is a wannabe gangster, wannabe tyrant who has been engulfed in all sort of criminal activity all his political career. He should tell the Guyanese people how many people he collected bribes from, how many people contributed through kickbacks to his home that he built. This mansion that he built at Sparnam, he should tell people whether that was built by kickbacks or bribes. He should tell the Guyanese people how he ended up in his home with investors negotiating money through a middleman called Sue. He should tell people how many black people were murdered by his death squads. He should tell people who killed Juan Arado. He should tell people who killed Courtney Cummingwing. They were all killed by his death squads. The US government condemned him and his government and his Minister of National Security or Home Affairs for those murders. The United States government issued a statement under President George Bush Jr. saying that members of the PP cabinet, Barry Jagdeo's cabinet, is involved in criminal activity in the country. So Barry Jagdeo, when he talks about criminality, is very comfortable. That's his realm. He's the head of the PPP crime family, the head of the PPP criminal enterprise. And he's projecting every black person, listen to him, every black person is a criminal. Raphael Trotman is a criminal, David Patterson is a criminal, Richard Bannister is a criminal. They're disrespectful to black people. And if you were to examine people who are criminals, they're all in the PPP. They're all Barry Jagdeo's type. They're all in the PPP.
I am happy that you have responded to Mr. Jagdeo's statements. He did say that the way you're lobbying in the U.S., you should have registered as a foreign agent.
Let me respond to that.
Yes.
Barry Jagdeo is not the Attorney General of America. He fancies himself as someone that knows everything. If we're lobbying, then let us deal with the U.S. government, right? He's in Guyana. What that has to do with him? What if we're lobbying? What is he doing? He has groups writing the congressmen, writing letters, writing senators. What is that? What is that? So is it Indian people who support the PPP have a right to speak and express their views, but black people can't because it's a criminal, because we're lobbying? The United States Constitution says that the citizens have a right to petition the government. Barry Jagdeo and his views can go to hell. If he wants to play a lawyer and attorney general of the United States, he can go ahead. But we don't need his advice. We have 5 attorneys who are members of the CGID board. I prefer to take advice on law from them, not a pseudo tyrant, not a gangster, not a mobster, not a kickback taker and a bribe taker like Barry Jackdale.
Thank you very much. Rickford Burke here on Voice of the Diaspora. Is there anything else you want to say about the Washington conference that you would have missed? Because I want to talk to you briefly about the relationship between Bar Jagdeo and Irfan Ali and what Irfan Ali is actually doing as a buffoon in Guyana. It is so evident, it is so clear that Irfan Ali is not the real president of Guyana in terms of how the country is run, how it is managed, how the oil is dealt with, and so on. And therefore, we'll talk briefly about that before we wrap up. This is a very brief program, of course. It is to talk about your about the Washington conference, and we have covered that. But I wanted to know if you wanted to add anything else before we go to a brief discussion about Ali, what he is doing, and his relationship with Jagdeo, and how embarrassing it is to see that Jagdeo is seen as the real president of Guyana and Ali as a water boy. And so, go ahead, Rickford.
Well, first of all, I want to also respond to something Jagdeo said that I didn't respond to. He said he's going to, we're going to have robust engagement from the government at the
Yes.
conference. I dare him. He said he's going to embarrass members of Congress and he doesn't care. I dare him. I, Rickford Burke, challenge him. Come to the conference and engage us robust. And have robust engagement with us. They're trying to get into the conference. I understand today they plan to send the Prime Minister to the conference. The conference is a private conference, and its delegates are members of the organizations. The government of Guyana is not invited. And if they come to the conference, we would not let them in. And they can do all they want. In this country, people have constitutional rights. Not like Guyana. In this country, Bar Jagdeo and his East Indian supporters have constitutional rights. And they could come and express those constitutional rights. But if they attempt to trespass in the conference, we'll get them arrested. That's the first thing. The second thing, he has threatened members of Congress. And that threat that he made is currently engaging U.S. law enforcement. We've met with them, both at the federal level and from Washington, D.C., and in New York. Criminals should be dealt with law enforcement. So we'll allow law enforcement to handle that aspect of the criminal threats, terroristic threats that he made. In terms of the conference, I want to also say that there's some other agencies that we have engaged, like Exim Bank. We want to talk about what is happening in Guyana and how Exim Bank can help other businesses to do business, to invest in Guyana. We're going to talk with some other U.S. agencies. I understand that the government is so concerned that their President Ali, or installed President Ali, the Minister of Tourism, Odis Waldron, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Hugh Todd, and Foreign Secretary Robert Passad are coming to Washington to meet with the same people we plan to have at our conference. And I understand that they are paying big bucks to discredit me, and CGID paying lobbyists and consultants. I want to wish them well. We are going to focus on our conference. If they want to spend taxpayers' money to attack me, I must be very important. I must be very important. CGID must be very important, that we can have a president leave his country to come to Washington to pre-butt what we would say without knowing what we would say. Pre-butt, offer pre-buttal to elected officials. But like I said, our conference will go on. We will say what we have to say, and I will make sure that there's justice for those people that were killed. The PPP cannot do anything about that. I will make sure that we discuss the displacement of Black people and the dispossession of their lands. The PPP cannot do anything about that. I will make sure that we discuss how the police is being used to oppress black people. The PPP cannot do anything about that. And by God's grace, as we old people say, God willing, our conference will go on. It will have an impact. We will discuss it with our elected officials. We will talk about what's happening in Guyana, and there must be change. There must be change. Guyana belongs to all of us. And the fact that they think Guyana belongs to them, that they can come to Washington to argue that Guyana belongs to us East Indians because we're superior, I wish them well. And they want to go to the people of the Congressional Black, members of the Congressional Black Caucus to make that argument, I wish them well.
Ian are in the comment section ask, why is the government and BJ afraid of this conference?
I think they're afraid of the conference because it's going to expose their atrocities and their racism, and they want to distract the people who are going to listen to us from hearing that message. It's not going to work. It's not going to work. They are demonstrating why we need the conference. They think that they can stay in Guyana and control us in America. They think they can stay in Guyana and control you in England because you're criticizing them and you're black and you're opposed to them. They think that they are entitled to be racist. They're entitled to ethnic supremacy, and nobody must talk about them. Imagine they're coming to Washington. They have the audacity to say they're coming to Washington to talk to the people who we are engaging. For what? Tell them that they're not racist? The people already know that they're racist. The people already know that they're racist. And it is not going to be like Guyana, where they think them alone must have a voice, and if you go against them, they'll kill you. People are going to listen to all sides. And already, because of Bar Jagdeo's statements, I understand that the government will have an audience with U.S. government officials about his conduct. And the government now is asking for the opposition, the parliamentary opposition leaders, to come to Washington as well to talk with U.S. government officials about what is happening in Guyana. And all of this is happening even without us having the conference, thanks to Barrett Jagdeo. So I want to encourage Barrett Jagdeo. Every Thursday, put on your jingy draws and come and create a scene in front of Border Market, because U.S. officials are watching and they're listening. And whenever you talk and you threaten people, they're making an assessment of it. They're making an assessment of it. And they know that they're trying to play the U.S. and they're cozying up to China. So we have some geopolitics in there as well. And the U.S. government will have to make an assessment whether Guyana is a true ally or Barrett Jagdeo is trying to use them while he's trying to cozy up to China as a threat that he's going to undermine U.S. foreign policy in the region. So all of these things we're going to talk to U.S. Politicians about, and they'll have to really do a serious introspection in terms of U.S. policy towards Guyana and assess Guyana's government in the context of its geopolitical relationship. I believe that the PPP government is undermining U.S. policy in the region. They've gone to China. They're meeting with people who are sanctioned by the U.S. They're signing memorandums of understanding with enemies of the U.S. And then they want to apply to the U.S. for $2 billion worth of U.S. taxpayer money through Exim Bank. So the U.S. government has to really take a good look of its policy in Guyana, especially in its relationship with this PPP government.
Rickford Burke here on Voice of the Diaspora. I think he's come off screen. It's a bit static there, but we can hear him clearly. Rickford, I want to wrap up by asking you for your comment on the madness and the buffoon behavior of the installed President Ali. We've seen a number of things happening over the months and so on, where people are beginning to believe that President Ali is just there for the ride, and he has no power, he has no control. I want to go to this brief clip first and to a position or a view that was given by an Indo-Guyanese, I would say, objective commentator that perhaps would have had enough. But let us go to this clip where President Ali was at the expo, the 2023 Guy Expo in Georgetown, and what transpired and what the gentleman said about Ali. And you can wrap up by giving your remarks about that and about what your thoughts are on President Ali's presidency.
You better move, let it don't stop walk. You violate and the place get dark. But you never. You better move, let it don't stop walk. You violate and the place get dark.
Incident with the president and his bodyguard. Now, two things were evident during that incident. One is that the bodyguards were not properly trained. If they were, the guard would have turned and meet his aggressor with lethal force. If that was one of Burnham's bodyguard, the president would have been dead, because the last person the bodyguard expect to approach him like that is the president. And in a split second, what would be going through that bodyguard's mind is that if he's attacked from behind, the president and his party is in trouble. Number two, the president has exposed his vulnerability because his guards are not properly trained. I've always known Mr. Ali to be a thug, a gutter rat, and a junkyard dog. I saw how he handled the lady in BURKE, and I heard him said some things in Dubai that Guyanese are very tolerant. How can you say Guyanese are tolerant when Guyanese have you in court with 12 matters at a time, expressing their discontent with the way you're handling their resources? I have no respect for you, Mr. President. You're not my president. Because the duty of any elected official is to act in the interest of the people who elect he or she. You have disrespected us. You have disappointed us.
You better move, let it don't stop walk. You violate and the place get dark.
Rickford Burke here on Voice of the Diaspora. Rickford, I know you're still with us, but you're just static
I'm
on
here.
the
I'm here.
screen. I can hear you clearly, but you're just static on the screen. But that's fine. We can hear your voice, and that's fine.
Uh-huh.
There's no movement from you or so on, so you're not actually live here, but we can hear you.
I'm not sure what's happening there.
When you look at, that's fine. When you look at those clips, tell us a bit about your thoughts.
I just love the gutter rat part. But seriously, I, I agree with him that the guards are not properly trained. I think the president's action in assaulting that guard was reprehensible. You would not see anything like that in the world. I don't agree with the gentleman that the guard should have turned his gun on him. I don't think that was an appropriate thing to say. But the president assaulted the young man, and if I were that young man, I would not go back and work for him. It's terrible. It's workplace violence. But it's their government. They could run it however they want. They're running the government like a rum shop. And when you have people who are from an environment of rum shops running the government, then what do we expect?
Wow. Rickford, thanks for that. My final question to you before we wrap up, and we are wrapping up now, is We know that there are activists here in the UK on the ground in Guyana, but we have a leading activist, a talk show host, and a political man who has been around for a very long time, Mark Benshop, who is still doing his thing in the US and is still fighting against the injustices happening in Guyana. He has been a political prisoner. He survived a lot of things, and he's still there, prominent, like myself, Dr. David Hines, yourself, and others, Shara Duncan, and so on. Have you invited Mark to the Washington conference to make a presentation? Have you discussed it in-depthly with him? What is happening?
Mark was invited to the conference. I haven't heard from him, but I've communicated with him. He has the invitation. He has all the information, and I guess at some point in time we'll talk about it. But he was invited,
Rickford Burke,
including yourself and Dr. Hines and everybody else.
Rickford Burke, thank you for taking the time out from your busy schedule to be here on Voice of the Diaspora. I wish you well and great success in that Washington conference, and hopefully I will get the opportunity to be there if you know what. But I want to say to you before I go that your work is tremendous. You must be lauded. You have my support, and kudos to you in all that you're doing. The regime will come down. Mr. Jagdeo is afraid. The PPP, they are afraid. And rightly so, they should be afraid. The dictatorship will come to an end. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. You too, you're doing a superb job as well. And I think we all have to work together to ensure that we have good governance in Guyana. We have inclusive governance. We have equitable growth. We have inclusive growth. We have everybody benefiting from the resources of the country. And we have equity, and we have social justice and racial justice. We want equal rights. We want equity. And all of us should join together to work towards achieving those objectives.
Thank you very much, Rickford Burke, for being here in Voice of the Diaspora.
Thanks for having
me. You better move, let it don't stop walk. You violate and the place get dark.
Incident with the president and his bodyguard. Now, two things were evident during that incident. One is that the bodyguards were not properly trained. If they were, the guard would have turned and meet his aggressor with lethal force. If that was one of Burnham's bodyguard, the president would have been dead, because the last person the bodyguard expect to approach him like that is the president. And in a split second, what would be going through that bodyguard's mind is that if he's attacked from behind, the president and his party is in trouble. Number two, the president has exposed his vulnerability because his guards are not properly trained. I've always known Mr. Ali to be a thug, a gutter rat, and a junkyard dog.
You better move.